So here's my very quick guide for changing Model 3 Performance brake pads. So we've already got the car in the air, we've taken the wheels off. You need to enable tow mode and chock the wheels if you're on a jack, obviously. The bolts at the rear of the calipers holding them on are E18 Torx bolts, so you need a socket for that and a torque wrench or a breaker bar to undo those two bolts. And then once you've taken those bolts out and you've got the caliper free, you need to rest it on something because it's going to be dangling from the hose otherwise, the brake hose otherwise. When you've got it rested, you can see that there are these bolts that are there, 4 on each caliper on the front, and they're locating the pads. But I don't take those out. What I do is to release the tension on these springs, I just put a couple of raw plugs, plastic raw plugs, to stop scratching underneath the springs to take the tension off. And then once you've done that, that would allow you to slide the pad off those pins without actually having to take them out. It just saves a bit of time. Then putting the new pad in, just slide that over the pins and take out whatever you've used to take the spring pressure off, and then the springs will stop the pads from falling out when you put the caliper back on. So obviously you do that side, do the other side, and then you need to push the pistons back in the caliper before you can get it back on the disc. So you need to get hold of a pad spreader and just wind that back, and that'll give you the space that you need between the pads to get it back over the disc. Okay. And once you've done that, the calipers should go back on, and you need to then torque the caliper bolts back up to 94 Newton meters. Caliper bolts to 94 Newton. What is it? So now moving on to the rear pads. The caliper on the rear is a bit different to the fronts in that it's got the parking brake built into it. There's the motor that controls that. It's just a 12-volt motor, nothing special. There's a 2-pin connector there at the back that controls it. So it's much easier to get to that once you've got the caliper off, so we'll see that in a minute. Now, although we've got the car in tow mode so that the hub can freely rotate, it's not clamping the pads to the disc, but it's not retracted the piston fully, so we need to do something with that later on. So same situation with the front. There are 2 E18 Torx bolts that hold the caliper onto the hub, and you'll need to use a breaker bar or a torque wrench to get those off. So once we've got the caliper off, we can get to that connector at the back of the motor more easily. And the way to get the connector off is you need to pull up the grey tab that you can see there. Once it's up, you can push it in, and that unlocks the connector so you can pull it off. So now we've got access to the terminals within the motor there, and we're going to have to connect a voltage to that. It can be 9 to 12 volts, so it can be a regular 9-volt battery. The positive connection is at the round end of that connector, and the negative is at the square end. This is just a PP3 9-volt battery, and as soon as I touch that on number 2, the motor rewinds, and just leave it on there until it fully retracts, and it will stop itself. That's it, and that's fully retracted, and that's all you need to do to bring the motor back. So the motor's back, but the piston isn't actually pressed back yet, so we'll have to still use the pad spreader on the rears. On the piston side, because it's only a single piston caliper, there are 2 spring clips either side of the pad, and that's what's retaining the pad there. That'll just come out by hand very easily. You can take the old pad out. And here you can see one of the spring clips just at the front there. It's difficult to see at the moment, but new pad goes in, and you just need to sort of wiggle that over the springs so it's retained by these 2 spring clips.
again.
Yeah, so this pad is going to come out, and this isn't going to have the spring clips on the back. The OE pad is going to have the spring clips here, but your pads that you picked up are going to have the double-sided tape, so you need to use the pad with the double-sided tape and unpeel it, and then that will stick on when you put the new pad in.
You're all good.
So once you've done that and you fitted the new pads, again you need to use the pad spreader just to push the piston back now all the way, to be able to get it back over the disc. So that's it, that's as far as it needs to go. That should go back on the disc now. So let's get that off. You can reconnect the connector on the EPB and torque those rear caliper bolts, this time to 85 Newton meters. Put the wheel back on, tighten the wheel nuts to 175 Newton meters. Remember to pump the brake pedal and bed the pads.